Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today I've got a really fun project for you. So we had a video we came out with called the Christmas Gnome, showing you how to turn this start to finish. This was a really popular project, something we had a lot of fun making, and other guys like making as well. But we wanted to step it up this year and turn it into a hanging version, something you could put on the tree with a lot more ornate, delicate features on the hat, and just spice it up with a little bit of color and some different beards. So there's a ton of different creative options here with this project, and we're going to be covering some really technical skew detail work to cut this finial using primarily only the skew. We'll show you some different practice cuts to do, as well as just how to turn this project start to finish. So let's get over to the lathe and have some fun. So before we start turning, let's talk about the material that we need for this project. I'll be using, this is roughly 2¼ inches square by 7½ inches long. You can scale this up or down depending on the size of ornaments you want to make and depending on the size of the tree you're going to put them on. This blank's definitely a little longer than I need. I'm going to have about 1½ inch, 2 inches of excess material that we can use for a jam chuck later on down the road. But I would say a minimum should be about a 2-inch square blank to probably 4½, 5 inches long, depending on how you want that hat to look and the type of decoration and kind of decorative elements you want in the hat. So the longer the hat, the more room for creative design as well. But this is what they look like finished turned. So you can see with this one, we've got a nice rounded base on the body, whereas the larger gnomes have a flat base because they're going to be on a tabletop. I thought this just looked nicer with a rounded base. And you can do a little bit different body shape as well, but I like the hat profile, and you can make it longer or shorter depending on what design you'd like to go with. But I do have my center points marked. So we're ready to mount this between centers, and what we need to do first is get basically half this blanked around, put our tenon on it for our chuck, and then we can flip it around and remount it. So we'll get this between centers. We need to get our tool rest height set up. We'll be using the skew to rough this out, get this to round and throw our tenon on. If you want to use a spindle roughing gouge, also a great tool to use. I'm trying to increase the amount of time I use the skew, get more practice in. So anytime I can remove excess material while using the skew, getting extra practice cuts, that's what I'm going to do. Give that a quick spin by hand. I don't need to have the tool rest all the way to this end because I'm not going to turn on this side at all. We'll just turn this to round. Let's start by having the lathe set at 0, and then we'll bring that up to speed. Just checking for any imperfections in the blank that might cause it to come apart as it's getting up to a higher speed, and just double checking our mounting methods, making sure this is securely on our lathe. To get this to round, we can use the skew. This is a 1-inch skew. We'll be doing peeling cuts to get this to round. We're just doing some basically 1/2-inch wide bites all the way across. That's a quick way to remove a lot of material. And we want to start, I'm going to move my locking lever over to the other side. We start with that handle low, we'll be on our tool rest, and then we lift the handle to engage that cut. So that's a really quick way of removing a lot of material on a spindle blank. It's a very efficient cut, and it gives you these large pencil sharpener type shavings, and a lot of times you can get kind of a ribbon coming off. One thing you want to be careful of though when you are doing those peeling cuts, generally guys are in a hurry to do those, just trying to get this thing down to round as fast as they can, and as they finish the cut right down here in the bottom, they go to move the handle to drop the handle lower, and then they try to move it across the blank. And usually what I've done myself is I don't get the handle and the cutting edge out of the way of the blank before I move it across, and I hit my cutting edge right into these square corners, and I pull a huge splinter off. So you want to make sure once that cut's completed, you get the tool out of the way, and then reset on your tool rest, and then engage the next cut. The tenon on this blank, I need to turn it for my shark jaws, which are going to be a little bit smaller than my normal 2½-inch dovetail jaws. So I need to size that appropriately. And I'll just move my rest over just to get my skew's cutting edge just a little bit closer get it a little bit of support as well. Eyeball it, or you can use calipers if you want to get right on the money. Throw a small little chamfer, and then I'm just going to square this up as well. Never hurts. Now that we have our tenon size, we've got a nice tenon shape on there that's going to match our chuck jaws. I just want to clean up these end grain fibers here, so we'll do a nice little slicing cut. When we're cutting this face here that's going to register against our chuck jaws, we want to make sure that it's slightly concave. That way it's registering on the outermost part of our blank and the chuck jaws. If it's convex, it's only registering on a small area and not the entire chuck face or chuck jaw face, and you're not going to get the support you need. So you want to make sure, if anything, it's either perfectly straight or slightly concave is ideal. So we'll take out our multi-tooth drive. We'll throw our chuck on here. This is the VM120 with the shark jaws. The one thing I like about the shark jaws over just my regular 2.5 inch dovetail jaws is because they are extended, it gives me more room away from the chuck body, especially if you're using a blank where you're trying to, where you have to use the entire blank and you only have a little bit of waste material still left in those jaws. It's nice to get just a little bit of clearance to maneuver your tool in and around your chuck. So we'll mount these in the jaws, and you can see we don't have any gaps between the chuck jaw face and our blank. That's a good way to tell you're going to have a good fit. We've got a good matching tenon to our jaws, and then no gaps here. Usually if you mount your blank in there and you can see, or you can put a dollar bill or a playing card between the chuck jaws and the wood itself, you've got a really poor hold. Chances are your piece might come out of the lathe on you. Especially where this blank is so far extended out of the jaw face. There's a ton of leverage out here. If we're pushing too hard on that bevel without tailstock support, this thing could come flying out. So we want to maximize the gripping power of our chuck by having a proper fit on our blank. And then we'll support this with our tailstock as well. For the roughing process and the majority of our turning, we'll keep the tailstock engaged until we're just at the very end of the cuts on the top of our gnome ornament. So at the orientation of our piece right now, this is how the gnome will be turned. We'll have the nice delicate finial hat on this end. And the reason being is I do need to drill a hole for the eyelet screw. So I'm going to have this end out here. But we'll be supported pretty much with that tailstock the entire way, just until we cut the very end of our waist section off from the top of our hat. One thing I want to mention as we're turning this, the tailstock doesn't need to be crazy tight. Once this piece is down to its final diameter, it's super thin and flexible, and if you've had this thing cranked down way too tight, it puts a lot of stress on the piece, and it can cause it to bow or it can cause it to snap. And the other thing too is, as we're turning that to shape and truing it up under tension, the second we remove our tailstock to cut the nub off and drill that hole, this thing's going to be off center. So we want to make sure with our tailstock we just have enough support there, just snug, not overly tight. It's one of the things we see in our workshops. A lot of times guys are over here just cranking this thing down and putting way too much pressure on it. And over tightening your tailstock also puts excess pressure on your bearings and can wear those out faster too. So all we need is this thing to be engaged on this end, giving us the support we need, but not crazy tight. All right, so let's turn our lathe back on. Now that we're in a chuck with a proper hold, we can bump up that speed a little bit more. We were at about 1500 when we were roughing this out and throwing our tenon on. So we'll bump this up to about 1800. And let's do some more peel cuts and just get the big corners off of our blank. Again, we've got that handle real low. I've got it low enough that I'm kind of engaging my banjo locking lever, so I'm just gonna flip this to the other side, get that out of my way. But I do have that handle nice and low. I'm on the bevel, or sorry, not on the bevel, I'm on my tool rest. Once we have that set, then we can lift that handle in a nice arcing motion and get the cuts that we need. So this blank I'm turning is a nice hard maple. And as we're doing our planing cuts, we can't take a ton of material off at one time. If you've ever watched other guys using the Skew on YouTube, a lot of times they're taking a fairly heavy shaving with a planing cut, and generally they're turning a lot softer woods where you can take a heavier cut. But if I try to take too heavy of a cut, I'll get too far below the surface of the wood, and my tool is not going to have anywhere to go, and it's just going to stop cutting, and it'll be bottoming out on end grain fibers and not moving forward. So we'll just take fairly light cuts to get this thing nice and flat, get the rest of these flat areas off, and get this to round. I just want to check the diameter of this blank here. We still have that flat we're going to get rid of, but we're just over about 2.5 inches there. I think once this is to round, if we're around 2 1/4 to 2 3/8, that's going to be a good diameter for the base of that hat. That's going to be the widest part of our project. So again, scale this up or down depending on what shape or what size of ornament you're going to be turning and what you like. For the planing cuts, I do like to bring my tool rest up a little bit above center on these larger diameter blanks, but we want to make sure we get on our bevel first. So we're on the tool rest, make sure you engage the bevel, and then I'll rotate that over to where my cutting edge starts cutting. And as it's peeling up those end grain fibers, as we're doing that planing cut, you could hear those splintery pieces breaking off. So if you're taking too heavy of a cut, it tends to splinter out. So what we can do is just come back in here, get that bevel, and we can just do a lighter pass. Right now I'm not looking to turn this ornament in a production style manner where I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. If we were doing production turning on this thing, I'd be going to my spindle rough and gouge, and this thing could be to shape a lot quicker. But because we're trying to use the skew and get better with it, I want to get as many cuts out of this material as I can. As we're removing the material, you know, it's just going to waste. Might as well get some practice in while we're there. This splintery piece went in pretty deep, but I'm not too worried about that because we will end up with this end of the blank being about 1/2 inch diameter. I'm going to start working towards the headstock. Again, we want to make sure I index basically on this line here. When I'm picking up a cut, I've found it helpful for me as I'm starting this journey on the skew learning train here, trying to get better with it. I've found if I index right here on this transition between the flat and my bevel, that's where I'll start contact with the wood, and then I adjust the handle to where I'm fully on the bevel, and then that cutting edge starts cutting. That just gives me a good reference point that I can, that is very repeatable for me. I start on that transition line, and then I'll raise the handle onto the bevel to the cutting edge. For me, the skew is never a tool that I really use because I could always do pretty much the same cuts with a spindle gouge. And it wasn't up until recently, after I saw Matt Monaco using this, just how versatile of a tool this can be and how many different cuts you can use with the skew. So I'm trying to get better with this tool, and I found this to be such a really cool thing to use, especially once you learn how to use it and how to control and tame the dragon that is the skew. But the planing cuts leave such a clean surface. You can see we do have a little bit of tear out right there. If we take just a little bit of a lighter cut, maybe bump up our speed, as well as having a sharper skew, I think these planing cuts might have dulled this slightly. So we'll hit the grinder, and then we'll keep doing some more planing practice cuts. That's one thing with the skew is this is such, every tool needs to be sharp when you're using it, but the edge on the skew is fairly fragile and gets dulled pretty quickly. So it is very important to make sure this thing is sharp all the time, especially for that fine detail work that we'll be doing on the hat here in just a minute. But if you can see this tear out we have here, let's just do another planing cut at a little bit slower feed rate across the surface. I'll bump up the RPM just a bit, and we'll see if we can refine this and get a nice burnish across the surface and show you how good of a surface we can get off our skew. So again, I index right there. You can see that black line right here. So I'm indexing, and then I like to raise that handle to where I'm on that bevel and the cutting edge. And if we slow that feed rate down, we should be able to get rid of that tear out. And if you just take a little bit lighter cut as well. But you can see the shavings building up on my hand there. Super fine little curls. And then I lower that handle to go back only on the bevel to take away the cut. Nice little burnish right there. But you can see all those fibers are very well cut. We do have those marks from that cutting edge just moving a little bit. Those create those little ridges. It's very hard to get a perfectly straight, flat surface if we're going across that surface really, really slowly. A little bit quicker feed rate would help smooth that out, but that surface is really well cleanly cut. So we're just getting practice cuts here. Obviously we could start roughing this to our rough shape for our gnome a lot quicker with a spindle roughing gouge, but I just want to get some good planing cuts. And again, we want to stay on the lower half of the tool. I don't want to go above my center line because that's going to give me a catch. Okay, we got a nice smooth blank here. Now we can see the grain orientation of this piece. There's some cool elements in here that'll make for a nice gnome, I think. But now we can start roughing this to shape. So I'm going to eyeball the dimensions and proportions of my gnome. So I'm going to have about 3/8 of an inch waist section here that we'll part down. This is going to be the top bead, or the top ball on the hat. And then I would say overall height of our hat, maybe just a hair longer. And then the body length is going to be about that. So if I grab one of our finished gnomes, show you what these pencil lines mean. So this is the line for the bottom of our body. This is going to be our hat. And then this is going to be that top ball right there. These are just rough guidelines for me. I'm going to use a parting tool just to get some material down, and then we can start getting this to a shape. And I want to see, as we're turning this, we're going to be practicing some different cuts with the skew, and we'll see what kind of shapes we see as we get this to our final shape. We might want to add a bead, not add a bead, add some chamfers, might do an OG on the hat. Who knows? We'll see when we get there. First cut, we'll do a peeling cut here to get this waist section down a lot smaller. We should be able to do this all in a single pass. Okay, very efficient cut. It's about a 1/2 inch wide all the way down. Now we'll go to a parting tool. As you're using that parting tool, we want to make that part about 1.5 times to 2 times as wide as your parting tool. That way there's clearance for those chips to come out and they won't get bound up and jammed and it'll cause problems. So you want to make sure you have clearance, otherwise it can get a little bit grabby. So that's the bottom of the body there. Now I'm going to create a part here. Actually, you know what we can do? We'll use the skew. We're going to step this down and create just a series of ledges, basically. You'll see that here in just a second. Just peeling cuts with the skew to get this roughed down to an approximate shape. Okay. Now you can see we have a rough approximation of our hat's shape. We can go to our spindle gouge now and start getting the cove on our hat. And I'm also going to create a small part for the diameter of our body where we want to be. And I'm going to step that about a 1/16 of an inch left of my pencil line because the parting tool tears out those end grain fibers terribly bad. And we're going to want to use a slicing cut to clean those up, and we can work that back to our pencil line. I'm going to go touch up my skew real quick. Those peeling cuts remove tons of material, and this cutting edge here is still sharp, but I want it razor sharp for what we're going to use it for here in just a minute. Alright, so we have this skew back to a razor's edge. What I want to do now is we'll start getting our shape, see what happens as we're removing material, seeing what shape exposes itself, and see where we want to add any more decorative elements and get a little creative. This is a really fun project because you can do whatever design and color you want to do on here, but as we're turning this and getting this a lot skinnier, we can add tons of different decorative elements to make this just more whimsical, fun, and decorative looking while it's hanging on your tree. So play around with different shapes and ideas and see what you think as you're turning. And different shapes might present themselves and you're like, oh, that's a really cool spindle shape that I have there. You could take a look online, at different, ornate spindle profiles and see if there's things that stand out to you, and you can incorporate them into this project. So for the majority of the rest of this project, I'm not going to be using the 1-inch skew very much. This thing is going to be a little bit too big to get in here and do the fine detail work that I want to do. And for me, at the level of skew ability that I've got right now, this one's definitely a little bit more cumbersome than the 1/2-inch skew. This one is the one I go to for all the fine, delicate detail cuts, beads, coves, and things like that. So we'll be using those two, and then I'll be using a spindle gouge on the hat. Trying to get this really steep sweeping cove here. I can do it with the long point down on the skew, but it doesn't give me as clean of a surface because I don't have the bevel pressure there burnishing that surface like I will with my spindle gouge. So these will be the tools we'll be using. But let's go ahead and get this up to speed, and I'm just going to do a series of V-cuts here to remove some of this material. That way I've got access to roll over the bottom of our gnome. V-cuts are a great way to get rid of material. Give yourself a chamfer if you need. So with the V-cut, it's long point down. The great thing is it leaves behind a really clean surface. But we're just giving ourselves clearance right here. By doing that V-cut, it's going to allow us a lot more room for the tool. Once we start doing that half round on the bottom with the skew, because the last thing you want is to roll that half round and then be impeded at the very bottom of the cut. When things are more delicate and you have that cutting edge straight up and down, I don't want to run into material here where it stops me from making the cut all the way. And with this V-cut, we're doing long point down, so we have short point, long point. You can call it the heel and the toe, interchangeable terms, but we want to make sure we have that long point down. Make sure the bevel is pointed in the direction of your cut, and then you just pick that up right at the cutting edge, and then we can take that all the way down. And if you want to, you can swing the handle, and depending on what you do, as you're progressing that cut, you can either do an OG curve, you can do a half round curve, whatever shape or direction that bevel goes, you're gonna have that same shape on your piece. So the one downside to that V-cut is you can't take a super heavy cut because it just gets in there and bottoms out, and there's nowhere for that cutting edge to go. So they do have to be fairly light cuts. That's about as thick of a cut as you want to do with a V-cut. So it's not taking off a lot of material, but as we're removing this, we're just getting more and more practice with the skew. Obviously, there's different tools we could use. We could do a peel cut and just take this all the way down if we're looking for speed. But in this video, I'm not trying to do this as fast as humanly possible. I'm trying to get as many repetitions with the skew as I can and maximize the value I'm getting out of my time at the lathe, as well as maximizing the value out of the material we have on our lathe. Turning for speed is one thing when you're trying to sell products, but right now I'm just trying to get better with that skew. So maximize our time in the lathe, but we look at that V-cut, the surface it leaves behind, extremely, extremely clean. So that's why this is such a versatile tool. You get very, very clean cuts, and we can do so many different things with it. Now that I have the access, I'm just gonna peel cut down the body diameter, about down to where this part line is in here, and see if that's the size of body I want. The heel of my skew is about to engage that surface there, so I just need to be a little careful. Stop the lathe, take a look at it, see if that diameter is a little too big or too small. See if the proportions are working out. I'm just going to measure this as best I can. So we're about 2 inches. So the other ones I turned were from 1 3/8 to 1 3/4 as far as the body diameter. So we'll bring this down a bit more. And this one, because I started out with a larger piece than the other ones, the brim on this hat's going to be a little bit bigger, and I think it might look a little better as well. So let's keep parting this down, or peeling this down, I should say. We'll go to my 1/2 inch skew right here just to give myself the space needed. And we'll take another 1/8 inch off, and I think that's going to be a great place to start shaping this and getting the profile of our gnome body. Okay, I think that looks a lot better. Once you'll see the shape once we start getting this rounded down here. I'm going to do a couple more V-cuts just to get that a little skinnier. Okay. With the V-cuts right here that we were practicing, trying to get as many repetitions as possible is really important. With this tool in particular, we need to walk before we can run because the catches with this are fairly catastrophic when you do get a catch. And with the V-cut, if you have a bad presentation and you do end up getting a cut, it digs that entire cutting edge in and flips that tool down, and you have a huge gnarly chunk of wood missing, or it can send the piece out of the lathe. So with these cuts on a skew in particular, we really need to make sure we practice these, dial them in, and we might as well maximize our time while we're getting this to shape, getting extra cuts. That's one of the common mistakes a lot of turners make, is they're trying to turn at the same speed as a production professional turner. If you see Matt Monaco or some of the other guys that are really proficient with the skew, guys will try to turn at the same speed as the production turners are, and they're just not ready to do that. They're not proficient enough with their cuts, and they haven't practiced enough to really increase and step up our speed to that level. We really want to make sure we get the correct practice in, dial our cuts in before we try to start speeding things up. If you try to speed them up before your tool control and ability is there, you are going to have some really gnarly catches. Alright, so we'll turn this on and we'll start getting the cove sweep, getting a shape, getting rid of these tiers. We'll use the spindle gouge to do that. And as we're stepping this back slightly, especially out here on the brim of the hat, we want to make sure that the flute's closed at 3 o'clock position, otherwise we're going to get a good skate. That tool has no support from the bevel and it just kicks around, so we want to make sure that we have that flute completely closed. Once we're on bevel, then we can open that flute and swing that tool handle to get that shape of our hat. And as you can see, there's a lot of tool handle movement and rotating this tool as we're making the cut. We start with that thing basically flat, parallel to the floor, bevel closed. Once I have bevel support and that cutting edge is going to be captured and it's supported, I can open up that flute, and then as we make the cut, we're swinging that handle around down to the center point. That's going to give us a really clean surface, clean cut fibers, and a little bit of burnish depending on how hard you're pressing on the tool. I think that's as thin as I'll make the brim from this side. We still need to do some slicing cuts on this side to clean up those end grain fibers. So I'm not going to make this any thinner right now. However, I will just clean up the surface from those skates I showed you that kind of tore up the surface just a little bit. Okay, that surface is clean. Now let's do some planing cuts in here. I'm going to drop the tool rest now that the diameter is much smaller. I don't need to be way above the rest like I was when it was larger. Got a good little skate there because I presented the cutting edge before the bevel. That'll give me a skate. Once we start getting down to about 1/4 inch or less, maybe 3/8 of an inch or less, we're going to be very mindful of our bevel pressure. As this is so long and it gets super skinny, too much bevel pressure can cause that wood to flex and chatter on us, and we can snap this finial off. I'm trying to be mindful of where the rest of the tool is in relationship to that brim. That way I'm not going to cause myself any wear marks from rubbing the blade of the steel right here on this corner. I'm just going to give myself a small V groove here. This is going to denote the end of the hat. I'll do a series of V cuts just to step it back. Plus we'll need the clearance here in just a minute. Okay. Obviously this is really, really thick still, but we're getting some good cove cuts with the skew. There's a lot of tool handle movement in this cut. We start on that bevel and then I'm swinging that handle away from me, as well as just rotating that down a little bit more throughout the process. But we have really clean cut surfaces here. And then we've got the overall height of our hat. And just looking at the proportions, I think the body is too long for the length of our hat. I think we're going to want to shorten this up here by about a 1/4 inch shorter than where I was intending to make it. I think that's going to give us a better proportion. I don't want the body too long. Ideally, this is the main focus of the hat, plus once the beard's on the face there, those are going to be your two main elements people see at first. I'm going to go back to the spindle gouge. Continuing this sweep. Seeing what shape I'm liking. Okay, I think it's going to be good. We could add a bead right down in there with the skew here in just a minute. I think that'll actually look really cool. We can go short point, or we could come in here long point. Long point down, still a nice planing cut. It's going to give us a good surface. The nice thing about the planing cuts with a skew, especially on really skinny spindles and finials and things, is it puts a very, very minimal pressure against the wood to make the cut because it's so razor sharp. Very little pressure against the wood, and it doesn't tend to chatter or flex it as much as like a spindle gouge does. So I'm liking the shape we're getting. Let's keep going. I'm going to establish the diameter of the ball on this end that I want. So we'll go long point down. Just some planing cuts. If you wanted to do a peel, you could do a peel as well. I feel a little bit of something. I don't know if it's torn grain. Yeah, I just kind of peeled out those fibers. That's going to be just fine though. Let's go ahead and do a V cut to establish the width of the ball on the top of the hat. Take a step back, eyeball your dimensions, see what looks good to you. I think that's going to be about the right length for what we need. So now let's start removing material. Go back to a V cut to clean up those curled fibers. If we need to get down in that corner, we can go long point down. Then again, a subsequent V cut. Let's start getting a clean cut slice on the underside of our hat. And I'm going to give it just a little bit of curve to it. And that's one of the cool things with that long point down slicing cut. If I rotate that handle throughout the cut, that's going to give me a nice rounded surface. So I'm going to pick this up just to cut the fibers clean first. And then we can start getting that sweeping shape. Okay, I've got the curve I want. Now let's go for a nice cleanup cut. And while I'm making this cut, I'm trying to minimize bevel pressure. Just enough to support the cutting edge, but not too much. Let's see if we have a clean cut surface. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I think we'll do one more cleanup cut. I don't know if you could hear it, but some of those fibers, they get jammed between your bevel and the cutting edge and then the wood surface, and it kind of bounces the tool around a little bit. And sometimes it can stop the cut from happening altogether. So let's pick this up and we'll just take an ultra fine cut. Okay, that's a lot better. Now let's start shaping this body. So we'll basically do a planing cut, giving the body a little bit of curve. And we'll have to do another slicing cut on those end grain fibers as the diameter up against the hat gets smaller. And I'm actually going to give myself just a part relief. Just so as I start rounding this over, I know where I want the end of that body to be. So as you can see, we're getting a radius shape. So typical planing cut, you keep that tool basically in the same position all the way across the rest, making that planing cut. But because we're going to be rounding this over, we'll start rolling that tool to a vertical position down once we get down to the very bottom of that radius. So we've got a good burnish here and here. Now let's get the center where we haven't made a cut with the skew yet. And I'm rolling that up as well, getting the heel of the tool down into that corner. And once we get closer to our final shape, we'll go long point down into that corner. I'm just going to pick up the cut right here and clean up those curled fibers so I can see exactly what's happening. That's the great thing about this slicing cut here. We can always index off that transition point on my skew, bring the handle around to where we're on the bevel, and then our cutting edge starts making that cut. So I'm running out of room here with that 1-inch skew. I'm hitting the brim of the hat. I could go long point down here, but even that I'm still going to be a little bit in the way. So I'll go to a smaller skew, go to our 1/2 inch. That'll give me a lot more space to start that cut a little bit further back. And we'll continue with that planing cut, and then trying to start round over the bottom of our gnome. I'm going to grab just my larger parting tool. And before I get that too much smaller, let's get the top of our hat finished. Want to maximize our support there. We don't want to get that too skinny, otherwise it can induce chatter and movement in our piece. But I do want to clean up this hat here. It's not the best surface I've ever seen. So I'm going to pick up the cut and just try and make a little bit of a refining pass. Focusing on getting a nice clean cut surface. Maybe a little burnish with our spindle gouge. And refining the curve as well. Just trying to smooth that out as much as I can. I don't know if you noticed, but the cut I just made with that spindle gouge was in kind of a incorrect position. So I had this, I started out right here with that flute way more open than I normally would like, because if I start that with that flute closed and pick it up here on the end, one, I don't want to reduce the thickness of the brim, but I can't really pick up that cut without hitting this bevel and having basically a straight line on the brim and getting that curve. It's going to be really difficult to get the curve based on the length of bevel I have on here. And there's two options we can do to solve that. Either I can grind the heel of the tool away and use more of a micro bevel just on the cutting edge to make this curve, or I can go to a skew. I can go to my 1/2 inch skew and just lightly negative rake scrape the surface to refine the curve. Or I can bring this down to where the heel of my bevel is still in contact with the wood and supporting me, but it's not impeding the shape I'm getting with the spindle gouge. So a few different options you can play around with. But it's a lot cleaner surface. It's not as perfectly smooth as I would like, because I want to ideally start sanding this with about 320, because all these other cuts from the skew are going to be so well cut, 320 is not going to be a problem. So what we can do is I'll use my skew here for just a second, and we'll just lightly scrape this surface just to blend the ridges I've got in my piece. I'm not really looking to cut the surface too much. I'm just trying to smooth out any ridges left behind from my spindle gouge. And that's looking a lot better. That feels much smoother. Unfortunately, I don't have the burnish from the bevel on my spindle gouge, but I'm going to continue refining the curve here. So I'll pick up my cut, start on the bevel, and then swing that tool handle around until that cutting edge engages. Just looking to get this just a little bit smaller, lighten up the overall weight of this piece, and get a little bit better curve while we're doing it. I think that looks a lot better. We'll throw a small bead right there. Let's go back to our skew 1 inch. We'll continue with these planing cuts here, getting this to a better shape. And right now it's time to start thinking about the decorative elements you want to add in this finial section right here. So we're going to have a nice sphere here on the end. I think I'm going to do a half bead transition, maybe do kind of an OG curved spindle, and then do another bead right down here. I think that's going to look pretty good. If you find these cove cuts with the skew to be a little bit more difficult than you want, we can always come back in here with the spindle gouge. Again, flute closed to get that cove shape, depending on whatever tool you want to use. I think the diameter of this is just a bit too big, so I'm just going to step it down. That's looking better. I think we still need to go a bit smaller because this is going to be roughly the outside diameter of that sphere. I think that's a good size. Continue with some more planing cuts here with the smaller skew. I think we'll throw that bead right in here. So I'm going to use a couple V cuts just to establish where I'm going to start my bead. And it's not going to be that wide. We're going to keep it fairly thin. Just something to be a nice decorative accent. Do some V cuts, give us space to create the bead that we want. I'm going to make that just a touch wider, give ourselves just a little more clearance, and then we can start rolling the bead with this smaller skew. It's going to be a little bit tricky because my cutting edge is so close to the hat right there. Even from this side, that's going to be a little tricky. Just going to smooth this over with the spindle gouge. And then come back in from this side. I think I'm going to actually step this down just a bit more. I think that's a better curve for that transition to the bead right here. Long point down, I'm just going to give myself another V cut. Give ourselves clearance. I think the diameter of this bead is just a little bit too big as well. I'm going to make this just a bit smaller. I think that's going to be a better looking bead overall. But this is very tricky because the heel of this tool is very, very close to engaging that hat. Start rolling this over. Another V cut to clean up because we went a little bit farther down. Couple planing cuts here just to reduce the stock on this side. Go long point down right here to get down in the corner. And I think what we can do is we'll just do a little decorative shape to transition to the bead itself. I think that's looking better. I'm going to start working towards the tailstock now. See, now we're starting to get that shape, and then we'll have the cove right in this section. So it's going to get really skinny where the pencil line is, and then it'll start to flare up right here, and then we'll have a nice half round in that section. V-cut to start establishing where this half round is going to end up. Come back from this side. Starting to work the shape of that cove, refining it. And that skew is going to give us a really clean surface off the tool. That's the biggest benefit to using the skew here. There we go. I'm really happy with the shape we're starting to get. I want to refine this bead just a little bit more. It's not as rounded as I would like, so I can index and then swing the handle until that cutting edge engages. And then we end up vertical with that skew. I'm going to go long point down here, index off the bevel, swing the handle around until I pick up the cut. Right there. There's a little bit of finesse involved, but I think that shape looks much better. Alright, let's do some V-cuts and reduce the diameter, give ourselves more clearance from this waist section here. I'm going to step this back with a series of V-cuts just to give ourselves more room to roll that spherical bead on the end. It's the great thing about the V-cut. Small bites at a time, and then you give yourself plenty of clearance. Come in from here just to establish our overall length of that top sphere. And this one's going to be short point down. We're going to roll this over, knocking the corners off first. Got a little too heavy of a cut there, kind of bottomed out on me. So that was a little tricky. If you saw that skate, let me show you what happened. This is the one thing that I have a really bad habit of doing when I use the skew. I'm in such a hurry to make the next cut that as I get down into the bottom there where you're ending up with that tool pretty much vertical, whether it's short point, down or up, doesn't matter. Same thing, I always do. I do this too often. But I get down into the bottom of that cut and finish it, and I'm so excited to make the next cut and smooth it out again. I don't bring the tool out of the way and then reset. I tend to just try and move it back to where I need to be, and I'm not paying attention to that cutting edge, which ends up with that tool straight up and down on a radius surface, which gives me a good skate. So you can see that's a pretty good little gouge in the wood there. Fortunately, we've got enough material we can turn that away. I just need to be more aware. Hey, once the cut is complete and we end on vertical, just bring the tool straight back out of the way. Don't be in such a hurry to make your next cut. Get that lathe back up to speed. Once we're down in the bottom, get the tool out of the way and reset. Start working this side. Get the rough shape, just getting some of the material out of our way so we can then roll a nice smooth bead. That's looking really good. Let's just see how deep that skate was in the material, see if we've cut through it. I've got just a little peel out right there. Fibers tore out on one of the cuts. That's okay. Our skate is almost done, so as we refine this just a little bit, we might lose some overall diameter, but we can always make this finial just a little bit skinnier to be proportionate. A good smooth radius with the skew with that heel is not the easiest cut to make. So make sure you get your practice cuts in before you come out to your lathe and you get frustrated because you have a bunch of catches when you're nearing the end of a project. Okay, we've got a really good burnish off the tool on this top bead. The shape of it's not exactly what I want, but we're going to get that shape finalized once we get our tailstock out of the way. So let's continue shaping this decorative section right there. I'm pretty happy with the hat and the bead, and I really like this shape we have going here. Let's just make it a little bit thinner, more delicate. Go back and do some planing cuts to get this cove shape. And as we're getting this a lot skinnier, we're wanting to be mindful of our bevel pressure. I'm going to switch to my spindle gouge now. I'm running out of a little bit of room with that skew to get the exact shape that I want. And I know that skew can get the shape that I want. I'm just not able to get the shape I want with the ability I've got. And that is okay. We can always go to a different tool. So as I'm smoothing out this cove here, I see this little ridge, and I think that's another design opportunity actually. Instead of just getting rid of that, I think we might use that and actually make a nice little shape with it. So before I get there, I think I want to make this just a little bit smaller. Just thin this out ever so slightly. We're getting thin enough now, we're starting to get chatter with the tool. And if we need to, we can give ourselves just a little bit of support with our support hand. Get your fingers underneath it. Just give it just a little bit of pressure to help make that cut happen. I'm supporting the end of the tool and the cutting edge and that piece at the same time, depending on how much chatter you're getting though. So I think I'm going to make the radius on that a little bit smoother. So let's come in here, pick up our cut. I think that's a better profile. I'm happy with the shape on the majority of this curve right there, but I just want to smooth this out right there in the bottom. Long point down just to clean up those curled fibers. Alright, so we're going to make this decorative element here just stand out. We're going to do a nice little V cut. And then we can use that spindle gouge to get back into that cove. Okay. Just need to get down right in the very bottom of this. With the nose of that spindle gouge, we'll come back from this side. Alright, so now that we have this established, I do want to clean this up a little bit right here in this cove, and I also want to refine the curve I have on the top of this hat. So I'm just going to do some very light planing cuts because we're getting nice and thin. So I'm trying to minimize my bevel contact and how much pressure I'm applying. I just want to make this just a little bit thinner throughout this section. This cut's a little precarious because we are getting very, very thin. I'm going to switch back to the spindle gouge just to clean this up. Looks a little bit lighter, more delicate. Now let's do some V cuts to reduce our waist section here, and we can start rolling over the top of this bead and getting that a little bit better formed. Series of V cuts, just stepping this material back, and we can come in from right here and just thin this material down. I'm going to pick up the cut midway down the bead. Ending with that tool in the vertical position. Indexing off that bevel, rotating the tool. Okay, that's looking a lot better. I got a lot better shape. Now I need to remove some of this waist section down here in the bottom. Series of small light V cuts, because right here this section is very, very thin and I don't want to put too much pressure on the wood. And now I'm going to go long point down. So I'm going to index off the side of that bevel there, and then we'll swing that handle around as we pick up the cut. Just refining the shape that we have. We'll just make this just a bit smaller. And what we're looking to do here, we're using the long point down for a slicing cut, which is going to give us a really clean surface on the end of this bead. Last thing we want to do is have a bunch of tear out right here, because we won't be able to sand it, because this is so flexible and thin. We can't put a lot of pressure against that material to sand through a ton of tear out. So we're looking to cut this as clean as possible, and there might be just a tiny bit of tear out right in the very center, but that's going to be just fine because we will be drilling that out for the eyelet screw. So I'm really happy with the decorative elements that we have on the hat. I think that's a really good looking shape, and it's given us a lot of practice and building our finesse with the skew to get these cuts. So let's continue with the V cut right here, or our slice. We'll try and cut this as clean as possible. And as we make these last few cuts, parting off the waste material, this is where your tailstock pressure really comes into play. Like we talked about before, we just want this light enough to support the material, but not too tight. And as soon as we part this off, if there was too much tailstock pressure, this thing would be super out of true once we part away our support material. And we're looking to just lightly cut this off with the long point down. And our waist section is free. So you can see that's running pretty true. I wouldn't really be able to turn up here without removing more material, because it's just ever so slightly running eccentric. But the very end there is running true enough that we can cut that clean and refine that shape. So what we can do is we'll stop the lathe and bring our tool rest closer, and we'll do a series of long point down cuts, just swinging that around and finalizing the shape on the tip of that while cutting it clean. And when I'm doing these really delicate cuts right here, I like to index off that bevel, then swing the handle around to engage the cutting edge and slicing those end grain fibers. Take a look at your shape, see if you need to refine it any more. And I'm being very, very, very delicate. I'm not forcing the wood, I'm not forcing the tool through the wood. Now I'll use just the tip of the skew flat on the rest. Give myself a very small dimple for our drill bit to help find center. At this point, let's go ahead and sand the hat. Get that completely sanded up through 320, and then we'll finish shaping the body and parting that off. So I've dropped my lathe speed down, and I'm going to start sanding with 320. The surfaces we have on this hat are extremely cleanly cut. Okay, the hat's sanded well. Let's go ahead and put our keyless chuck in, and we'll drill a hole for our eyelet screw. So I've got our lathe speed slow for drilling and sanding. Make sure that bit finds your dimple, finds center, and then we'll drill that in just about 1/4 inch. And if you feel the need to, or if you had a little bit of tear out from that drill bit, you can just lightly sand that over with our 320. Okay, let's finish shaping the body, getting that more to our final shape. We're just getting this waist section of material just a bit smaller, giving ourselves more room to finalize the shape. And the great thing about rolling a bead or any convex curve with the skew is you can always start it anywhere throughout the cut. You just need to make sure we get on our bevel first, If I want to start it back here, that's easy enough. If we want to start it down here halfway through the curve, we're just going to index off that bevel and then rotate that over while maintaining bevel contact until we start the curve, and then we continue to roll that skew to a vertical position to end the cut. Get back in here with a series of V-cuts, further reducing the waste. And I want to slice those fibers just past where my final, where the finished diameter of this piece is going to be. As we slice through those, we've got clean fiber to cut through, and we're not going to have any tear out that goes deep into our finished piece. I think the shape on that's looking really good, and the overall dimensions and proportions of our piece is looking really good. So let's just keep refining our shape as we get this smaller and smaller. But again, we can pick up that cut anywhere we want throughout that curve. We just need to make sure that we have proper bevel support to initiate the cut. And if you want to go long point down or short point, this is a nice, smooth, pretty big curve. It's easy to do either direction. So I think that curve's looking better. I do need to give myself a little more room for the width of this tool down in the bottom of that V groove. So what we can do, essentially just a peel. Do one more peel right here. That'll give us room for the width of this tool down in that bottom, especially once we start getting this really, really thin. Starting to get our final shape. Okay, that's looking really good. Before I go any thinner on that, I'm already getting a little bit of movement out of the piece now because it's not supported and there's a fair amount of weight spinning around. I want to get my sandpaper and sand the body of this while I still have enough support to do so. And just like that, very little sanding required. Skews leave such a clean surface. So before we cut this off and are done with the turning process, now's the time to add any color if you're going to add color. But as far as our color choices go, we can do the entire hat a solid color, or we could do something like these where we have natural wood and just a little bit of color, or a majority of color and a couple variations. So get creative, see what you want to do with your piece and what you have with your shape. Alright, so I think on this hat in particular, we'll use green. I'm going to paint this bead here, the top ball, and then just the rim, or sorry, the brim of the hat green. I think that's going to give us a good contrast between the natural color and then just adding a little bit of decorative flair. So anytime I use these markers, I run that speed really, really low. It's easy to dry the marker tips out, and then I'll use the tool rest to support the marker itself. And then I rotate the marker just to make sure it's always saturated. That accents the hat really well, frames it nicely. Now let's go ahead and do this bead. I'm going to switch to a different marker. This one's a little dry. This one's got a fresh tip on it. It's got a really fine point to allow me to get down into this area between the two shapes we have going on. If you get any dust on the tip of the marker, go ahead and just wipe that off. That way you can get that fine application of dye exactly where you need it. And then I'll go back and forth across the surface, just making sure that I have a good even saturation of color. That looks good. Now let's do the top. I'll get inside that drilled hole just a little bit. Bump up my speed slightly. And I like to keep a couple of each color on hand, that way I can rotate them depending on how much surface area I have to do. That way the tip doesn't dry out and I'm sitting there waiting for it to refill itself. Perfect. I'm going to go back to the brim of the hat, just make sure that's even saturation so all the green is the same shade. I think that looks good. Okay. I think we have some good decorative elements on there that definitely makes it pop, frames the hat in nicely, and gives us a good looking design that we have with the shape and the color. So now it's time to part this off. So let's go back in here with the skew, and this is going to require a little bit of finesse, a little bit of delicate touch. We will be turning basically one-handed with the skew for a part of this as we part this off because we need to support our piece. So we'll bring this back up to our turning speed. And we're just going to take small bites out of our the nub section there that's supporting our piece, doing small little V-cuts until we eventually cut through this, hoping to cut the fibers super clean so we don't have a bunch of tear out down on the bottom. I'm going to use my fingers against the tool rest down here to support my hand so I'm not just free floating. And then I can pinch my thumb and my index finger to support the piece. And there we go. So we've got a nice clean cut surface, just ever so slight tear out just in the center where it broke off, and I didn't cut it as clean as I wanted, but I can sand that out and that'll be no problem. But I'm really happy with the color and the shape that we have on this. So let's sand the bottom, and then I'll take this outside and throw a coat of spray lacquer on it, give it a nice finish, and then we can apply the beard and the nose. So while the body is drying with that spray lacquer finish, let's go ahead and turn the nose. And then once we part this off, we can take that out and throw a little bit of spray lacquer on the nose as well. And once we're done with that, we can glue on the beard, glue on the nose, put the eyelet screw in, and then we'll be done with the project. But with this piece being as big as it is, we can turn the nose out of the same material. That way it matches the hat, and we don't have, two different colors of maple. Unless that's what you want to go for. If you want to have a contrasting color for the nose, absolutely go ahead. But I'm just going to use this material to turn the nose while it's already in the chuck. So I'll switch back to the 1-inch skew for some peel cuts just to get this down to that right size we need for the nose. Throw a nice little chamfer on there. This will be plenty long enough for the nose that we need to turn, but it's still just a little bit big in diameter. And I do want to get my tool rest much closer to where we're actually going to be cutting. So I'll bring that in. That way we got a lot more support with our tool rest. And then we'll just cut off this material here. And then as far as the diameter of the nose that we need, I'm going to eyeball it maybe just a hair bigger than that. So we'll peel cut this material down just above that pencil mark. And as far as the length of nose, the brim on that hat's pretty long compared to these other ones that I've turned. So I'm going to make this nose just a bit longer than the other ones that I did. That should do it there. Throw a small V-cut in, just in case that pencil line gets erased. I'm going to switch to my 1/2-inch skew now to roll the nose over and get the profile that I want. Starting to just work that shape in. If you try to go for your final shape in one pass, there's going to be too much material that you're trying to remove, and it's going to stop that skew from making the cut all the way through. It's going to get bound up. There we go. I'm going to step this over just a little bit, make sure I've got plenty of material. I can always sand the back of the nose where it'll glue against the body if it's too long, but I can't add material if it's too short. And I want to make sure that I do have a big enough flat surface on the back side of the nose where it attaches to the body that I have a good glue bond. I don't want to get a full complete circle on the back side and have no contact area for that glue to help bond. So I'm running out of space with the skew right there to get my bevel perfectly in line with where I need to go. So I think I'm actually just going to go to a parting tool. I don't care if there's tear out on the back side of the nose because it will not be seen. Before I get that any smaller, I do just want to clean up the end of the nose here. I'm going to go long point down and just try to get underneath those torn fibers. Okay, now we just need to refine the radius. Okay, it was a little bit tricky because I was using that skew one-handed to roll that over, but we got the cut we need. So let's go ahead and sand the surface now. Just smoothing out the curves we have. We've got a really clean cut surface, and we'll inspect the very center right there on the end of the nose, because if there's any torn fiber there, once you get that finish on there, it stands out really bad. And with that being the focal point of the face of our gnomes, we don't want any tear out. We want a really good surface. Okay, and that looks really, really good. So super clean cut, happy with that. I'll get in there with and remove as much material as I can with the skew before we part it off, because I still hate tear out even though I know it's not going to be seen. And then we'll catch that nose, because once that goes in the shavings, that nose disappears. So there's our nose, very well cut. Nice shape, that's going to look good on our gnome. And then I'm just going to sand the back of that because there's a tiny fiber there that needs to be flattened. Okay, I'll take this outside, finish our spray lacquer on the body and the nose, and then we'll clean this all up, come back in, glue the nose on, glue the beard on, and the eyelet screw. Alright, so we've got our finish cured on our gnome. I did a few coats of the spray lacquer, let it cure overnight, and now we're ready to glue on our beard and the nose. We'll start with the nose because we want to wrap the beard around the nose once it's glued on, and we'll cover the fur here in just a second. But let's go ahead and start by gluing the nose onto our gnome. So before I glue the nose on, I'm going to pick a side, take a look at your ornament, see if there's figure you want to show on the side around the beard or on the back side of the gnome, and then you can just do a rough placement of the nose itself. Just going to put a pencil mark there. And with this being covered by the beard, we can go a little bit heavier with the glue. And I'm just using the Glue Boost Fill and Finish. This is the thicker glue, and I'm using that whip tip to get that glue exactly where I need it. I'll spray the activator directly onto the nose where it'll contact the glue, and then we can set that around. Position it where you want it. Double check how close to the brim depending on where you want the nose to be, and then we'll just let that set up for just a second. So now that we have the nose on, let's go ahead and glue the eyelet screw in. And you'll definitely want the nozzle, the really fine nozzle, to get that glue just down inside the hole so it doesn't get on our finish. And make sure you don't put too much glue on, because I don't want to put the screw in there and then have it squeeze out and get glue all over the top of our ornament. And then depending on how you have the hook, you're going to want to orient the screw so that way it hangs in the proper orientation. So I'm going to have that in line with the nose. Where's the nose? Once you have that set, we'll just hit it lightly with activator. And you want to be careful not to over-activate it, because the solvents in the activator can cause that spray lacquer finish to bubble a little bit and kind of ruins the finish. So just a nice easy coat. But now let's talk about the fur we'll be using to get the beard. So if you go to your local hobby store, you can buy these sheets of faux fur. This is a really great way for getting a cool looking beard like we have on these guys here. And I've got this one pre-cut for the body. And the biggest thing is making sure it's rounded down on the bottom where it wraps around the front of the gnome. And then we cut a V-notch that'll wrap around the nose and keep everything tucked in nice and tight like we have on these. As far as gluing it on, you can use CA glue or a hot glue gun. I do like the hot glue gun because it gives me just a little bit of time to position it and get it exactly where I want. As well as sometimes, depending on the thickness of your CA, it can wick through the backer and kind of glue the beard up so it doesn't have that lifelike movement to it, and it kind of gets stuck and clumpy. But it's a little bit tricky to get right before that hot glue gets too cold and sets. So we got to do this fairly quickly. So we'll put a nice layer of hot glue. We'll start working on this one side. I'll tack that down. And once we get it wrapped around the nose, then we can mess around with getting the rest of the beard in place. But we really want to focus on getting this section right around the nose done. The one downside of the hot glue is it creates these long little strands. But I'll use my fingernails to push that backer down up against the wood surface. And now that's tacked into place. And then we'll use our fingernails to tuck this down around the nose. If you need to get a small tool, something to just kind of get that underneath and pressed in, you can. Usually my fingernails work to get it where I need it. All right, so we have that beard tacked up around the nose and just under the brim. So that's all solid. And now if I flip this over, we need to work on tacking down the edges on both sides. I'm not going to glue this bottom edge of the fur down because having it come straight off the body like that, it makes that beard stay a certain way. And if I glue it down, then it rolls the beard under and looks kind of strange. So I don't glue this bottom edge right down here. So we'll get our hot glue and we'll tack down the edges. And then we'll leave this area unglued just so the beard hangs right and it looks nice. And once you have him glued on, then you can style his beard a little bit. Give him some life. If you have like a small little comb, you can kind of brush it to make it fluff up a little bit more. But let's throw our ring here on the eyelet screw. And then I've got just a small piece of wire I bent into an S shape. Now that we have that beard and nose on with the eyelet screw, this project's done and it's ready to hang on the tree. I think that turned out really cute. This is a really fun project, and we incorporated a ton of different turning skills and different practice cuts we can make with the Skew while we were doing this project. But it's super fast and simple to do. It's a ton of fun, and if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section down below. And as always, if you want to see more wood turning videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.